Hey, what's happening, everybody? My name is Dev. I've been a serious guitarist for over 3.5 decades. And this is a series I call It's Just My Opinion, but you're wrong if you disagree. And today we're going to be talking about the great Metallica. I'm wearing a hoodie that I got on their 30th anniversary of the Black Album Tour. And I have with me one of the most important albums of my entire life and probably my most listened to vinyl, Master of Puppets. We'll talk about my Master of Puppets story in a little bit and how that was really my introduction to metal when I was young and in the 80s. But today we're going to talk about Load because we're coming up on the 30th anniversary of the album Load. And I believe that it marks the end of classic Metallica and the beginning of the modern Metallica that we're still in like this cycle of currently. So a couple things to point out about Metallica at the time is like I think version 1.0 was the really early stuff, and then it gets Kill 'Em All stuff. I would even say the Dave Mustaine influenced era of Metallica is 1.0, and then Cliff all the way through Master of Puppets. I would call that version 2.0. 3.0 would be And Justice for All once we get Jason in playing the bass, even though you can't hear it on Justice. And go check out In Justice for Jason or In Jason for All. People have remastered and remixed the album where you can hear the bass. It's incredible, easy to find online. That all the way through until Load, or all the way through the Black Album, would be the like kind of the classic versions of Metallica, and then we get the modern version, kind of starting with Load. And there's a few things here, specifically as a guitarist. And longtime viewers of the channel will know that I'm half Filipino. My mom's from the Philippines, and Kirk is part Filipino. In fact, he was on the cover of the Filipinas magazine when I was in high school. My mom, I remember her bringing that. It was like trying to connect with me. It was something that we finally had in common, quite honestly. But Kirk's playing really takes a turn on this album. And to begin with, there's a lot less like thrash speed stuff, and we're starting to see a lot more of who he is and has been since then. A lot more bluesy phrasing and note choices, a lot more wah, like heavy use of the wah. And he's playing some rhythm guitar in this album, which is a new thing. And if I remember correctly, I believe in the interviews at the time they were saying, that was to give it a little bit more of a looser sound. Metallica also was in a really interesting spot here. The Black Album was massive, and they had survived the alternative rock revolution in a way that a lot of their other peers had not, right? And so I'm going to tell a bit of an anecdotal story about this era, kind of between the Black Album and Load. I was in high school at the time, and I want to say it was '92. I was at a house party, and we had MTV on, and there was a lot of different kinds of folks there, and at the time, the '90s was one of those last decades where everyone was kind of, well, not everyone, but I was a music fan, so I liked all types of music. I'm not sure I've said this before on the channel. My first two CDs were Holst's The Planets and Please Hammer Don't Hurt 'Em by MC Hammer. So like, even though I'm clearly like a guitar first musician, that was where I started when I had my first bit of money to buy CDs. That's where I started. So I've always been a music fan kind of across the board. And at this party, MTV was on, and there was a bunch of hip hop kids who like their identity was that they loved hip hop, and that was their like their life and their focus, and they were dancing to whatever was on before, and then Metallica's "Sad But True" came on, and they kept dancing to it, and they knew it, like to give a sense of the like the crossover appeal that Metallica had at the time. That was really something else, specifically for metal in 1992. So about 4 years later, we get Load. And again, we're coming up on the 30th anniversary of the release of Load, which is why I'm talking about this. But we get Load a few years later. It's the first time Kirk is playing rhythm guitar, and James had played some lead guitar on some earlier stuff. This is the first time Kirk had played rhythm guitar on any of the recordings. Obviously, he'd play them live, but James would play all of the rhythms on all the earlier albums. And now we're getting more of kind of a band feel, but they also had changed their look, and they'd released some press photos prior. And a lot of us were really confused because all of a sudden their hair was short. They had the like leather jackets, leather vests. Again, kind of what Metallica looks like now, and except Lars had guy liner or mascara. I can't remember which one of the two, but like there was makeup involved, and it was just a very different look, very different feel than what we were expecting. And like Cliff in the Canadian tuxedo just going out there and ripping. So that was already a little bit weird. The album, there are some songs that have stayed with us on it, but it's really not. It doesn't contain the same density of like classic bangers that they keep playing live. And that has kind of continued on since Load. This really was a turning point for the band. But another thing that I think people kind of overlook is Load came out just a few years before Napster and the whole Napster bad thing. If you aren't familiar with this, if you didn't live through it, Napster was the first file sharing program that widely got released in 1999. And I believe his name was Sean Fanning, the guy who created Napster, was a huge Metallica fan, and Metallica was hard against it. I believe Lars even called him and said, like, hey, we need you to take this down. You're taking food out of, you're costing us money. And it was just a really weird time. But it also, like, Lars in particular, but Metallica in general came out looking kind of bad out of that. So we had this kind of 1-2 punch against Metallica. And again, they're amazing. I love Metallica. I've seen them many, many times, and I always say everyone should go see Metallica live just to see what it's like. It's incredible. But we had this 1-2 punch kind of pushing Metallica back, and then we get Reload, Saint Anger, eventually Death Magnetic, and we're getting these things that are like, everyone's kind of anticipating hopefully a return to form with stuff that happened with Load and later. So I think that's really important to kind of understand. And again, that said, Metallica is one of my favorite bands. I will always be a fan of Metallica. I think that they released the first S&M at that point in time with the San Francisco Symphony Orchestra, if I remember correctly. Absolutely incredible stuff. I believe Michael Kamen was even the conductor of that. Just magnificent work. Nobody else was even at that level. And then we saw some really funky stuff coming after it. Like the Scorpions tried to do a thing with the orchestra, and it was just like, Rock You Like a Hurricane doesn't hit quite the same as, Master of Puppets or One with an orchestra. Really kind of showing how Metallica was in their thematic use and their lyrical content, the themes with which they dealt, and the epicness of what they were able to do with popular metal, really taking it to new heights. So that said, I'm going to tell a real quick story about my introduction to metal and how that was through this album, Master of Puppets. I think it's worth telling because I had one of the what I believe is one of the best introductions to metal. So I think I was in 7th grade in the late 80s, mid to late 80s, probably 86. And there was a kid who sat at my lunch table. We had like assigned lunch tables. He was a few years younger than me. I want to say he was in 5th grade. And we got along really well. He had like a rat tail. He was like a little bit of a rocker. But his older brother was an 80s metal teen, right? And he was like, oh, you'd really love metal. You'd love this band Metallica. And he made me a tape of Master of Puppets. And the way they made the tape was he took one boombox. Took one boombox, put it in a closet, hit play on it, put another boombox facing it, hit record on it. So the speakers for this were recording into the mic of the other boombox. And so the first thing you hear was his door closing. He was closing the door to the closet. Click. And then you hear the beginning of Battery. Do, 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 do. Goes all the way through the whole album. The album ends. And then you hear the door open. Click, and then the recording stopped. And for years, that was the only Metallica that I had when I was a kid. And I thought that was part of the album. I was like, oh, they know that you're going on a journey. They're opening the door. You go on the journey. Then you come back. And my brain was introduced, I guess, to the idea of the hero's journey through that recording. And then later on, when I got the tape, I was like, oh, where's the door? It's like it completely changed, my experience with it. But I was really, really happy that I've got that. Billy, if you're out there and you hear this, I maybe shouldn't say your last name, but thank you for introducing me to Metallica all those decades and years ago. Again, go see Metallica. The classic stuff is absolutely classic, and there are a number of reasons why the highlights of the shows are still One and Master of Puppets, but there's nothing like a Metallica show. There's absolutely nothing like it. It's just my opinion, and you're wrong if you disagree. See you next week. Cheers.